The October morning in London was crisp and grey, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made tourists huddle under umbrellas and seek shelter in nearby cafes. Despite the dreary weather, hundreds of people had gathered outside Buckingham Palace, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among them was 16-year-old Jake Morrison, a high school student from Chicago who was visiting London with his youth group. Jake had always been the class clown, the kid who could make his friends laugh with outrageous stunts and perfectly timed jokes. His teachers often described him as spirited but good-hearted, though his parents worried that his need for attention sometimes led him to cross lines he shouldn't cross. This trip to London was supposed to be educational and enriching, but Jake saw it as an opportunity to create content for his social media accounts. Standing beside the ornate palace gates, Jake pulled out his phone and began filming himself with the guards in the background. "What's up, everyone? Jake here, live from Buckingham Palace, where these guys have been standing still for forever," he said to his camera, his voice carrying the confident energy of someone accustomed to performing. For an audience, the royal guards stood at their posts with the stoic dignity that had become their trademark worldwide. These weren't just ceremonial positions. Each guard was a highly trained soldier who had earned their place through rigorous military service. They were trained to remain motionless and silent regardless of weather, crowds, or distractions. Representing centuries of British military tradition and discipline, Guard Daniel Wellington had been posted at Buckingham Palace for 3 years. The 25-year-old soldier took immense pride in his role and understood the significance of maintaining the dignity and respect that his position demanded. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before earning his place among the Queen's Guard, and he approached his ceremonial duties with the same seriousness he had brought to combat operations. Jake's friends from the youth group were scattered throughout the crowd, some embarrassed by his attention-seeking behavior, others encouraging him with laughs and cheers. Their group leader, Mrs. Patricia Holmes, was busy managing the other students and hadn't yet noticed that. Jake was preparing to do something that would grab international attention for all the wrong reasons. As Jake continued filming, he noticed how the guards remained completely still despite the growing crowd and increasingly bold attempts by tourists to get reactions from them. People were taking selfies, waving enthusiastically, and even making silly faces, but the guards maintained their professional composure without so much as a blink. "Check this out, guys," Jake said to his phone camera, his voice taking on the mischievous tone his friends knew all too well. "These guards are supposed to be tough, right? See how tough they really are." He was playing to his online audience, where his videos of pranks and stunts had earned him several thousand followers who expected increasingly outrageous content. The crowd around Jake was a mix of families, tourists, and locals, all there to witness one of London's most famous traditions. Parents lifted small children onto their shoulders for better views. Elderly couples shared umbrellas while pointing out details of the palace architecture, and tour guides explained the history and significance of the ceremony to their groups. Jake didn't understand was that he was about to cross a line that would transform what he thought was harmless fun into a moment that would challenge everything he believed about respect, consequences, and the power of social media. The guards he was preparing to prank weren't just tourist attractions. They were real soldiers with real feelings, real families, and real dedication to their duty. Daniel had noticed the teenager with the phone as he had been trained to notice everything within his field of vision while maintaining his position. He had seen countless tourists try various antics to get reactions from the guards, and he had learned to filter out the noise and focus on his responsibilities. But something about this particular young man's energy felt different, more aggressive, and attention-seeking than the usual tourist behavior. The weather was getting worse, the drizzle turning into a steady rain that sent many tourists scurrying for cover under the palace archways and nearby trees. But Jake was too focused on his performance to notice the worsening conditions. He was building up to his big moment, the stunt that he believed would go viral and earn him the online fame he desperately craved. As Jake positioned himself directly in front of Daniel's post, he took a deep breath and prepared to do something that would shock not only the guard, but millions of people around the world who would eventually watch the video. He had no idea that his next action would set in motion a chain of events that would teach him profound lessons about respect, dignity, and the real meaning of strength and courage. With his phone camera recording and pointed directly at guard Daniel Wellington, Jake took a step closer to the ceremonial post. The rain had begun to fall more steadily, but Jake was completely focused on his performance. He looked directly into his camera and grinned with the confidence of someone who believed he was about to create the perfect viral moment. "Okay, guys, watch this," Jake announced to his phone, his voice carrying across the immediate area and causing several nearby tourists to turn and look. "I'm going to see if I can get a reaction from this robot soldier." His words carried the casual cruelty that teenagers sometimes display when they view others as entertainment rather than human beings. Without warning, Jake suddenly barked loudly at Daniel, not once, but 3 times in rapid succession. Woof, woof, woof. The sound was harsh and jarring in the dignified atmosphere surrounding the palace. The barks were loud enough to startle nearby tourists and echo off the palace walls, creating a moment of shocked silence as everyone processed what had just happened. The crowd's reaction was immediate and mixed. Some tourists gasped in surprise and disapproval, clearly uncomfortable with Jake's disrespectful behavior. Others, particularly some younger people, laughed nervously, unsure whether they should be amused or appalled. Several parents quickly moved their children away from the area, not wanting them to witness or potentially copy such inappropriate conduct. Daniel heard every bark clearly, but his training and professionalism prevented him from showing any external reaction. Inside, however, he felt a complex mix of emotions. There was initial surprise at the unexpected and disrespectful behavior, followed by disappointment that someone would treat his service with such contempt. But there was also something else, a recognition that this young person was clearly crying out for attention in a misguided way. Jake continued filming, expecting to capture the guard's shocked reaction or angry response that would make for perfect social media content. Waited for Daniel to break character, to shout back, or to show some sign that the prank had gotten under his skin. But Daniel remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged, his posture unwavering. "Come on, man, I know you heard me," Jake called out, his voice becoming more aggressive as he realized his stunt wasn't having the effect he had hoped for. He barked again, this time even louder, drawing disapproving stares from more tourists and causing his own group members to begin looking around nervously for their leader, Mrs. Holmes, who had been counting heads and organizing the group near the palace gates, heard the commotion and quickly made her way through the crowd toward the source of the disturbance. When she saw Jake with his phone out, behaving aggressively toward one of the guards, her heart sank. She had been a teacher for over 20 years and had seen countless examples of teenagers making poor decisions. But this level of public disrespect was beyond anything she had expected from her students. The rain continued to fall, and Daniel could feel the water beginning to seep through his uniform. But he maintained his position with the same dedication he had shown during far more challenging conditions in military service overseas. He had faced enemy fire, extreme weather, and life-threatening situations. And he wasn't about to let one disrespectful teenager compromise his duty or dignity. What Jake didn't know was that his behavior was being observed by more than just casual tourists with cameras. Palace security had been alerted to the disturbance, and several officers were making their way through the crowd to assess the situation. Additionally, multiple tourists were recording the incident from different angles, creating a comprehensive record of Jake's behavior that would soon have consequences he never anticipated. Among the observers was Margaret Stevens, nurse whose own son served in the British Army. She watched Jake's performance with growing anger and disgust, but also with a determination to do something about it. Margaret had her own phone out and was recording the incident, not for entertainment, but as evidence of behavior that she felt needed to be addressed. Daniel's fellow guards, positioned at other posts around the palace, were also aware of the situation developing near his position. They remained at their posts as protocol demanded. but their attention was focused on their colleague and the increasingly aggressive teenager, who seemed determined to provoke some kind of reaction. Jake was becoming frustrated by Daniel's complete lack of response. In his social media world, any reaction was good reaction, but no reaction meant failed content and wasted effort. He began to circle around Daniel's position, barking intermittently and making increasingly crude comments, not realizing that he was digging himself into a hole that would soon become much deeper than he could imagine. The crowd around them was beginning to thin as tourists became uncomfortable with the increasingly aggressive display. Some people were actively moving away from the area, while others were pulling out their phones to record what they sensed was becoming a significant incident. The atmosphere had shifted from curiosity and amusement to tension and disapproval. What happened next would transform Jake's misguided prank into a moment that would be viewed by millions of people around the world and teach him lessons about respect, consequences, and human dignity that no classroom or lecture ever could. After several minutes of Jake's increasingly aggressive behavior, something unexpected happened that would change the entire trajectory of the situation. Daniel Wellington, still maintaining his perfect military posture, made a decision that broke every protocol he had been trained to follow, but honored something much deeper: his humanity and wisdom as a soldier, who had seen real combat and understood real courage. Without moving from his position or changing his stoic expression, Daniel began to speak. His voice was calm, measured, and carried the authority of someone who had earned the right to wear his uniform through genuine service and sacrifice. The crowd around them gradually fell silent as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Young man," Daniel said, his words clear and distinct, despite never turning his head toward Jake. "I can see that you're looking for attention, and you've certainly gotten it. But I want you to think about something while you're standing there with your camera." Jake stopped barking mid-sound, his mouth falling open in shock. This wasn't the angry outburst or the disciplinary action he had expected. The guard was actually talking to him, calmly and respectfully, despite the humiliation Jake had just put him through. For the first time since starting his prank, Jake felt uncertain about what he was doing. Daniel continued, his voice carrying across the now silent crowd. "This uniform I'm wearing doesn't just represent ceremony and tradition, it represents every soldier who has served this country, including friends of mine who didn't make it home from Afghanistan. When you mock me, you're mocking their memory and their sacrifice." The tourists around them had stopped taking photos and were listening intently to Daniel's words. Even the rain seemed to lighten, as if nature itself was paying attention to this unexpected moment of education and grace. Jake's phone was still recording, but his hand had begun to shake slightly as the weight of Daniel's words began to sink. "I've seen real courage," Daniel went on, still staring straight ahead with military precision. "I've seen 19-year-old soldiers run toward enemy fire to save their friends. I've seen medics risk their lives to help wounded civilians. I've seen what it looks like when someone truly puts others before themselves. That's why I stand here with pride, rain or shine, because this position honors their memory." Mrs. Holmes had finally reached the scene and was watching in amazement as one of her most troublesome students received a lesson in respect and dignity from someone who clearly understood both concepts at the deepest level. She could see that Jake was struggling with emotions he hadn't expected to feel, and she made the decision to let this unexpected teaching moment continue. Margaret Stevens, the former military nurse who had been recording the incident, found herself wiping away tears as she listened to Daniel's response. This was exactly the kind of dignity and grace she had hoped to see, and she knew that Jake was receiving an education that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Daniel's voice softened slightly, but remained firm and clear. "You seem like an intelligent young man who simply made a poor choice. We all make mistakes, especially when we're young and trying to figure out who we are. But I want you to understand that respect isn't something you give because someone demands it, something you give because it's right." Jake stood frozen, his camera still recording, but his attention completely focused on the guard's words. He had come to London expecting to create funny content for his social media followers, but instead he was receiving a masterclass in maturity and character from someone he had just tried to humiliate. "I'm going to continue standing here," Daniel said, "doing my duty with pride, regardless of how anyone chooses to treat me." That's what real strength looks like. Not reacting to disrespect with anger, but responding with dignity and purpose. I hope someday you'll understand that kind of strength. The crowd around them was completely silent now, with many people openly moved by Daniel's response. Several tourists were crying, and even some of Jake's fellow students who had initially found his behavior amusing were now looking at him with expressions of embarrassment and disappointment. Jake finally found his voice, though it came out much quieter and less confident than it had been just minutes earlier. I'm sorry," he said, the words seeming inadequate even to him. "I wasn't trying to, son," Daniel said gently, finally turning his head slightly to look directly at Jake for the first time. "The fact that you're apologizing tells me everything I need to know about your character. You made a mistake, but you're owning it. That's the first step toward becoming the man I believe you can be." The rain had stopped completely now, and shafts of sunlight were beginning to break through the gray clouds, casting an almost ethereal light over the scene. Jake's phone was still recording, but he had forgotten all about social media and viral videos. Instead, he was experiencing something much more valuable, a moment of genuine human connection and learning. What neither Jake nor Daniel knew in that moment was that multiple recordings of their interaction were already being uploaded to social media platforms around the world. But not for the reasons Jake had originally intended. The videos would indeed go viral, but they would become powerful examples of grace under pressure, dignity in the face of disrespect, and the transformative power of responding to cruelty with wisdom and compassion. Within hours of the incident at Buckingham Palace, multiple videos of Jake's encounter with guard Daniel Wellington began appearing across social media platforms. But these weren't the viral prank videos Jake had intended to create. Instead, they became powerful examples of dignity, triumphing over disrespect. With Daniel's measured response earning praise from viewers around the world, Margaret Stevens was the first to upload her recording, adding a caption that read, "This is what real strength looks like. A young person tries to humiliate a British guard, but watch how this soldier responds with grace and wisdom. Every teenager should see this." Her video was shared thousands of times within the first few hours, with comments pouring in from parents, teachers, veterans, and young people themselves. Jake sat in his London hotel room that evening, staring at his phone in disbelief as he watched his intended prank transform into something entirely different. The video he had planned to post as entertainment had become a viral lesson in character and maturity. With Daniel as the hero and himself as the cautionary example of how not to behave, the comments on the various videos were overwhelmingly supportive of Daniel and critical of Jake. But many also acknowledged Jake's genuine apology and expressed hope that he would learn from the experience. Veterans from around the world shared the video with their own commentary about the importance of respecting military service, while parents used it as a teaching tool for their own children. "This guard showed more maturity in 5 minutes than most people show in a lifetime," wrote one commenter. "And credit to the kid for apologizing, that takes guts too." Another comment read, "My son is the same age as this boy, and I'm showing him this video tonight." This is how real men handle disrespect, with dignity and education, not anger. Major news outlets began picking up the story, with BBC, CNN, and other international networks featuring the incident in their reports. About viral social media moments with positive messages, the story was framed not as a scandal, but as an example of how one person's grace under pressure could transform a negative situation into a powerful teaching moment. Daniel, unaware of his growing internet fame, continued his duties at Buckingham Palace with the same dedication he had always shown, when his commanding officer, Captain Sarah Mitchell, called him in to discuss the incident. Daniel initially worried that he might face disciplinary action for breaking protocol by speaking while on duty. "Wellington," Captain Mitchell said as Daniel stood at attention in her office, "I've been watching the videos of yesterday's incident. Your response was ... unconventional."
Yes.
"Ma'am," Daniel replied formally, "I understand I broke protocol. By engaging with a member of the public while on duty, I'm prepared to accept any consequences for my actions. Captain Mitchell studied him for a moment before her stern expression softened into something approaching a smile. Guardsman Wellington, in 30 years of military service, I've rarely seen such a perfect example of leadership under pressure. You turned a moment of disrespect into a masterclass in dignity and character. The palace has received hundreds of calls and messages praising your actions. Daniel's relief was visible as Captain Mitchell continued. You're not in trouble, son. Quite the opposite. Your response exemplified everything we hoped to. Represent as members of the Queen's Guard. You showed that real strength isn't about retaliation. It's about maintaining your values even when others try to tear them down. Meanwhile, Jake was struggling with the aftermath of his viral moment. His social media accounts were flooded with notifications, but instead of the admiration and popularity he had sought, he was receiving a mix of criticism and surprisingly thoughtful messages from people who wanted to help him learn from his mistake. Mrs. Holmes gathered Jake and the rest of their youth group that evening to discuss what had happened. Instead of delivering a lecture or punishment, she facilitated a conversation about respect, consequences, and the power of social media to either harm or heal. Jake, she said gently, I know you were trying to be funny, but I want you to think about how your actions affected not just that guard, but everyone who witnessed it. What do you think you learned from his response? Jake was quiet for a long moment before answering. He could have gotten me in trouble, or been angry, or embarrassed me in front of everyone. But instead, he tried to teach me something. He treated me better than I treated him. One of Jake's classmates, Maria Santos, raised her hand. Embarrassed to be with our group when you were doing that. But when I saw how the guard responded, I felt proud to witness it. He showed all of us what real character looks like. The discussion continued for over an hour, with students sharing their own thoughts about respect, dignity, and the responsibility that comes with having the power to record and share moments with the world. Jake listened to his classmates' perspectives and began to understand that his desire for attention had blinded him to the impact of his actions on others. That night, Jake made a decision that would surprise many of the people following his story. Instead of trying to capitalize on his viral fame or defend his actions, he recorded a sincere video apology, but he didn't post it immediately. Instead, he spent hours writing and rewriting his words, trying to capture not just his regret for his behavior, but his genuine appreciation for the lesson Daniel had taught him. Dr. Amanda Chen, psychology professor at University College London, who specialized in adolescent behavior and social media, had been following the story with professional interest. She reached out to several news outlets to provide commentary on the incident and its broader implications for how young people navigate respect and attention-seeking in the digital age. This is actually a beautiful example of restorative justice. In action, Dr. Chen explained in an interview, instead of punishment or humiliation, we see education and growth. The guard's response created an opportunity for real learning, and the young man's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes shows genuine character development. As the story continued to spread globally, it began to inspire conversations in schools, military academies, and families around the world about the difference between seeking attention and earning respect, and about how responding to disrespect with dignity could create powerful moments of positive change. 3 days after the incident, Jake finally posted his video apology. It was unlike anything his followers had seen from him before. No jokes, no attempts at humor. Just a sincere young man taking responsibility for his actions and expressing genuine gratitude for an unexpected lesson in character. I want to apologize not just to Guard Wellington, but to everyone who had to witness my disrespectful behavior, Jake said, looking directly into the camera with none of his usual performative energy. I thought I was being funny, but I was actually being cruel to someone who was just doing his job. The way he responded taught me more about strength and maturity than I've learned in my entire life. Jake's apology video was shared even more widely than the original incident, with many people commenting on his maturity in owning his mistake and learning from it. The video caught the attention of military families, educators, and even some celebrities who praised both Jake's growth and Daniel's original response. What happened next surprised everyone, including Jake himself. Daniel Wellington, through official channels, requested permission to respond to Jake's apology. With approval from his commanding officers, Daniel recorded his own video message, speaking not as a viral internet personality, but as a soldier and human being who recognized genuine remorse and growth. Jake Daniel said in his measured, respectful tone, "Your apology took real courage. It's much easier to double down on a mistake than to admit you were wrong and commit to doing better. You've shown me that my decision to respond with education, rather than anger, was the right one." Daniel continued, his voice warm with genuine appreciation. "I've served alongside many young soldiers who made mistakes early in their careers, but grew into exceptional leaders. Character isn't about never making mistakes. It's about how you respond when you do. You've shown real character in how you've handled this situation. Mutual respect between the two became a powerful symbol of how conflicts could be resolved through understanding rather than retaliation. Educational institutions around the world began using their exchange as a case study in conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, and the power of social media to spread positive messages." Dr. Amanda Chen, who had been following their story, published a research paper titled "From Disrespect to Dignity," a case study in viral redemption that analyzed the psychological and social factors that made their interactions so powerful. Her work was picked up by education journals and began influencing how schools approach discipline and character education. The British Army, recognizing the positive impact of Daniel's response, invited Jake to visit a military base during the remainder of his stay in London. The visit was arranged as an educational experience, allowing Jake to meet soldiers, learn about military service, and understand the real meaning behind the ceremonies and traditions he had mocked at the base. Jake met soldiers who had served in combat zones, medics who had saved lives under fire, and engineers who had built schools and hospitals in war-torn regions. Each conversation deepened his understanding of what service and sacrifice really meant, and why Daniel's uniform represented something much more significant than a tourist attraction. "Before this week, I thought soldiers were just tough guys with guns," Jake confided to Captain Mitchell during his visit. "I didn't understand that they were people who chose to put others before themselves, sometimes paying the ultimate price for that choice." Captain Mitchell nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what Guardsman Wellington was trying to teach you. The uniform represents service, sacrifice, and a commitment to something greater than yourself. Your willingness to learn shows that his message reached you." The most moving moment of Jake's visit came when he met Corporal James Harrison, a veteran, who had lost his leg in an IED explosion while serving alongside American forces in Afghanistan. James shared his story not to make Jake feel guilty, but to help him understand the real cost of the freedom and security that allowed tourists to visit places like Buckingham Palace safely. "I don't share this to make you feel bad," James explained. As they sat in the base's recreation room, "Share it because I want you to understand that when you mock one of us, you're mocking all of us, including the ones who can't stand at those posts anymore, because they gave everything for their country." Jake listened with tears in his eyes, finally understanding the full weight of what his harmless prank had really represented. "I'm so sorry," he said to James. "I never thought about any of this. I was just thinking about getting likes and views. And that's normal for someone your age," James replied kindly. "Social media makes it easy to forget that there are real people behind every uniform, every job, every role. The important thing is that you're learning from this experience." Jake's visit to the base concluded, Daniel made a special appearance to speak with him privately. Their conversation, while not recorded, was described by witnesses as emotional and transformative for both young men. Daniel shared more about his own military experiences and the pride he felt in serving, while Jake expressed his newfound respect for military service and his commitment to using his social media platform more responsibly. "You know," Daniel said as they prepared to part ways, "you have a real opportunity here. You've got thousands of followers who saw your mistake and your growth. You could use that platform to teach others about respect, about learning from mistakes, about the importance of thinking before acting." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that. Maybe I could visit military families, or volunteer with veterans organizations, or just try to spread positive messages instead of just trying to get attention. Their conversation ended with a handshake that was captured by a base photographer and later shared on official military social media accounts. The image of the young American teenager and the British Guard shaking hands became a symbol of reconciliation, growth, and the power of approaching conflict with wisdom rather than anger. As Jake prepared to return to the United States, he carried with him not just memories of London's tourist attractions, but a fundamental shift in his understanding of respect, responsibility, and the impact that every individual can have on others through their choices and actions. 6 months after returning to Chicago, Jake Morrison had transformed from an attention-seeking teenager into a thoughtful young advocate for respectful social media use and military appreciation. His social media accounts, which once featured pranks and stunts, now shared educational content about military service, respectful behavior, and the importance of thinking before acting online. Jake's high school invited him to speak at assemblies about his experience, and his story became part of their digital citizenship curriculum. Students who had once followed him for entertainment now followed him for inspiration. As he shared regular updates about his volunteer work with local veterans, organizations, and his efforts to promote positive online behavior, "I used to think getting attention was the same as getting respect," Jake told a packed auditorium at Lincoln High School. "But I learned that real respect comes from how you treat others, especially when no one is watching or when someone can't defend themselves. That British Guard taught me that strength isn't about putting others down, it's about lifting them up." Meanwhile, in London, Daniel Wellington had been promoted to Lance Corporal. Partly in recognition of his exemplary handling of the viral incident, his commanding officers noted that his response had brought positive international attention to the British military and had demonstrated the kind of leadership and character they hoped to see in all their soldiers. Daniel continued his duties at Buckingham Palace, but he also began speaking at military academies and leadership seminars about conflict resolution and maintaining dignity under pressure. His story became part of military training programs, demonstrating how soldiers could represent their country with honor even in unexpected and challenging situations. The bond between Jake and Daniel had continued across the Atlantic through regular video calls and messages. Daniel had become something of a mentor to Jake, offering guidance as the teenager navigated his transformation from class clown to responsible young adult. Their friendship had become a powerful example of how authentic connections could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. "Jake has shown me something important too," Daniel reflected during one of their calls. "His willingness to change and grow reminds me why we serve, to protect and inspire the next generation. His transformation proves that people can change when they're treated with respect and given the opportunity to learn." The story's impact extended far beyond their personal growth. Educational researchers began studying their interaction as an example of restorative viral justice, how social media incidents could be transformed from sources of shame into opportunities for learning and growth. Schools around the world incorporated their story into anti-bullying programs and digital citizenship training. Dr. Amanda Chen's research paper about their interaction had been translated into 12 languages and was being used in psychology and education courses globally. She had stayed in touch with both Jake and Daniel, documenting their continued growth and the lasting impact of their viral moment. What makes their story so powerful, Dr. Chen explained in a TED Talk that was viewed over 2 million times, is that it demonstrates the transformative power of responding to negativity with wisdom and compassion. Both young men were changed by this interaction. Jake learned about respect and responsibility, while Daniel discovered the profound impact that grace under pressure could have on others. Jake's transformation had impressed everyone who knew him, but perhaps no one more than his parents, who had watched their son mature dramatically over the months following his London experience. His father, Mark Morrison, spoke about the change during a parent-teacher conference. "We used to worry constantly about Jake's need for attention and his poor decision-making online," Mark explained to Jake's teachers. "But that experience in London was like a wake-up call. He's become thoughtful, responsible, and genuinely interested in making a positive impact. We're incredibly proud of the young man he's becoming." Jake's English teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had assigned her students to write essays about personal transformation. Jake's submission was so compelling that she asked permission to share it with other educators. In his essay, Jake wrote about the moment he realized that Daniel could have humiliated him in front of the crowd, but chose instead to educate him. I expected anger, punishment, or embarrassment, Jake wrote. Dead. I received patience, wisdom, and respect I hadn't earned. That guard saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself, the potential to be better. His faith in my ability to grow changed everything about how I see myself and how I want to treat others. As their story continued to inspire others, both Jake and Daniel received invitations to speak at conferences, schools, and military events. They often appeared together via video link, demonstrating the genuine friendship that had grown from their initial encounter and showing audiences how conflict could be transformed into connection through mutual respect and understanding. 2 years after the viral incident, Jake was accepted into a military academy, inspired by his experience with Daniel and his work with veterans to pursue a career in service. Daniel, meanwhile, had been selected for officer training. With his superiors citing his demonstrated leadership abilities and his positive representation of military values, their story had proven that social media, often criticized for spreading negativity and division, could also be a powerful force for positive change when people chose to respond to challenges with wisdom, compassion, and integrity. The teenager who had barked at a guard as a joke had become a young man committed to service and respect, while the guard who could have reacted with anger had instead chosen to plant seeds of wisdom that would continue growing for years to come. Their viral moment had lasted only minutes, but its impact would continue for decades, inspiring countless others to choose dignity over retaliation, education over punishment, and growth over blame. In a world often divided by misunderstanding and conflict, Jake and Daniel's story became a beacon of hope, proving that even the most negative situations could be transformed into opportunities for positive change when people chose to see the humanity in each other